In my work, I want to be a mirror to society like Hogarth was. I get a lot of flack for my work sometimes because of its depiction of sex and depiction of violence. And I tell people, make the world a nicer place and I'll make nicer prints. It's not the role of the satirist or the social commentator to be accepted and embraced all the time, because people don't ultimately want to look at that side of themselves. I want to change the world in that way. Now, I'm guilty of this too. I put myself in there in a lot of ways too. So it's not just complete railing on people that I don't agree with or whatever. The work is about me too. I'm in there.
Hey everybody, this is Platemark, Series 3. My name is Ann Shafer, and I'm an independent curator specializing in prints and printmaking. In Series 3, I'm joined by Ben Levy, who you've likely heard on other episodes. We are interviewing the colorful characters that make up the print ecosystem. Now we're talking fine art prints, not posters or reproductions. We are talking about artists who carve into things and use ink and presses to make limited edition fine art prints. I always want to make that clear. This week you're in for a treat. We are interviewing Tom Hück, an artist who makes large-scale relief prints, woodcuts, and they are heavy on social satire. They look at rural life in Missouri, where he grew up. We'll talk about one specific work. Well, we'll talk about a bunch of things, but we'll talk about the work, The Tommy Peepers, which Tom described as an adolescent boy's first look at a real pair of boobs. And they turned out to be a neighbor of his who he ran into 30 whatever years later and confessed to her that she was the subject of the work. Find out what her reaction was. Also, you'll find out from Tom which old master print he modeled the entire composition on. I have included an image of the Tommy Peepers on the show notes over at platemarkpodcast.com, as well as the old master print after which it is modeled. So that's a little surprise for you, a little bonus. His print shop is findable online at evilprints.com. Look up evilprints.com. And the name should tell you just about everything you need to know about Tom. He is a super smart guy and a very talented artist. And part of the reason why I wanted to have our first interview with an artist be with Tom is because he loves old prints, and there are lots of quotations from old prints in his work. For instance, you'll hear him talk about Dürer, Albrecht Dürer, a lot, and you'll also hear him refer to Martin Schongauer and William Hogarth and Honoré Daumier and Sucot, all sorts of people who use the power of print to point out societal ills. So you're in for a treat. Let's buckle up and get rolling. Hey, Tom, it's great to have you on the show. Ben and I are so happy to talk to you today.
It is good to be here. Thanks for having me.
In Platemark Series 3, we're doing interviews with really good people from the print ecosphere, of which you are one.
Well, okay, thanks.
Well, let's start at the top. Tell us your name and where you live and work, and what do you do?
My name is Tom Hück. I'm a printmaker. I live and work in Park Hills, Missouri, about 60 miles south of St. Louis. My shop used to be in downtown St. Louis, but right before COVID, I moved everything after 26 years in downtown St. Louis. So that's where I'm at now.
You left the print shop intact in St. Louis, right? Evil Prints?
No, Evil Prince is here now. Evil Prince's everything is in my space now.
So who's up in St. Louis?
My master printer opened up a screen print shop in my old space, and I'm like half owner in that, silent partner. It's his baby, you know.
What's his name?
JT Felix. He's fantastic. Yeah, he's printed all my big blocks for the last 10 years now. So
is it open as a community shop? Can you schedule an hour or two to do some t-shirts or something?
Not right now, but eventually. They're in their late 20s and early 30s. They're young enough to fight this out. Let them have it. It's going to be an interesting road for them, but I think that they're talented enough. He and his crew of people, they're going to be fine.
I hope so, because every town needs a good screen print shop.
Yeah, I moved everything out to the country. Evil Prince is now in the country. where
That
it
must have been
belongs.
a process.
You have no idea. That's 5 podcasts and a reality TV show. It was unbelievable during COVID, the summer of COVID too. It was not easy, but we pulled it off somehow, amazingly.
You were telling me in our pre-talk that you converted the barn on the back 40 of your grandparents' house, and
Yes.
you did it because somebody said to you, "Hey, Tom."
Well, my friend Dennis McNett, who everybody knows or should know, he was passing through a couple of years ago and stayed overnight with us. And he was like, "What's that big building down at the end of your yard?" I was like, "Oh, that's my grandpa's old shed, you know." And he was like, "Well, let's go look at it." And I was like, "I've seen it, but okay." So we went and I slid this giant door open. And he looked at me like, "What is wrong with you, man?" I was like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Why is this not your studio?" And a light bulb went off. You know how you take for granted things that you've seen and known all of your life. I'm not in a position where I can afford or would I want to stop making work for any period of time. I work every single day. I carve and draw and work on my sketchbook all day, every day. We just decided to move the whole thing, and we did. We just finished it the night before Woodcut Boot Campers arrived, which is my big summer workshop. So we pulled that off. It was unreal. It was good enough for me to work in last August. We had that as a goal. There was a section of the building that I was able to fully work in. I have a small press in there, and it was heated and cooled year round. So that part of the building, now the whole thing's okay. So it was a process.
When you did woodcut boot camp, where did people stay?
They camped
Oh! What am I saying?
in tents. And then
I'd be in the house with you, Jennifer.
and upstairs, the upstairs loft too. It was like a barracks. We had that set up so they could sleep inside if they wanted to. That's our 16th. It was our 16th year doing boot camp. So,
Oh, I didn't realize it was that many. Wow.
So how did that come about?
we needed a way to make money in the summertime. No one buys art in the summer. Everybody goes to print workshops in the summertime. There's Frogman's Press, which is a fantastic one, and a number of other ones. And I thought, well, you know, my friend and former assistant Aaron Lovell was like, "Why don't we do a woodcut boot camp?" I was like, "Okay, all right," and that's how it started. To be able to generate some income during the summer months.
Do people arrive having already carved wood, or are they
No,
linoleum cutters and they're like,
no, they do it from drawing on the block to printing it 10 days later. Everything. They carve the whole thing, and it's up 24/7. It is very intense.
it would
And
have to
they're
be.
24 by 30. That's the size of the block. And you can see it online. People can go and see it online what they did, you know, so.
And you're just to make, I Googled you, Tom Hück, and Evil Prince didn't come up until like 3 pages later. So don't go to tomhuck.com, go to evilprince.com.
Yeah, interesting. Do Tom Hück printmaking or something.
Yeah.
Maybe that'll be better.
Yeah.
And my middle name's Andrew, so it's really Tom and Hück. Yeah. Well, that was a problem early on. People thought it was a pen name. Like this artist from Southern Missouri who does satirical funny prints using Tom Hück as a pen name, a la Mark Twain. What? You know? So like the first print curator that ever bought any of my work was Jerry Cohn at the Fog. And she asked me, right? She was like, "Is that your real name?" I was like, "What? What? Is that your real name?" Yes. I had to show her my driver's license.
And speaking of your name, it has an umlaut also. So
I wasn't the first person to put that in there. So the place that represents me in New York is C.G. Burner. I had a show there in 2017, and I saw them huddling Armin Kunz in his group of people, and you know they were speaking German, and so they had to fill me in, and they were like, "Tom Hück, we are putting the umlaut back in your name." I was like, yes, do it. I want it in there because, you know, it's Dürer. He's my main man. And Motörhead's my favorite band. So they have umlauts. And umlauts look mean. That's the only way I can put it. It looks mean and badass.
Some people see the umlaut over the U as a smiley face. So just
God, way to bring me down, Ann. Way to bring me down. Way to throw a bucket of water on it. But okay, I'll take the smiley face too.
I'm fascinated by the fact that you've teamed up with Armin, who's delightful. But C.G. Berner is a very storied and has long history as old master print dealers out of Germany. So the fact that they're turning to some contemporary work is fascinating. I mean, I haven't talked to him about it. Maybe we should.
You should.
But it's just fascinating.
I was that kid that 20 years ago at a print fair was standing there for an hour. Obviously, I wasn't going to buy anything, looking at the Rhinoceros print. And then eventually he was like, "Who are you?" You know, and over the years, we got to know each other. And then in the last 5 or 6 years, it made sense that we work together because print dealers are a rare breed anyway. It's a lot of work to sell my stuff. It doesn't match people's couches. And that's not the intention. Whereas even some of the stuff that comes out of the most well-known print shops with the most well-known blue chip artists that are dabbling in prints or whatever, that stuff can still be decorative at times, you know, and that's fine. I love it too. I needed someone to handle my stuff in New York. It was time. And before that, it was David Crute. Yeah, David Crute was the first show that I ever had in New York. It did all right, you know, but it's a big deal for someone who makes their living off of prints, living in Missouri, to be able to show at that level. It's a long journey and it's very hard. And so someone like Armin, he just knows so much about all of my heroes. Even if he never showed my work, I'd still be bothering him about little things, you know, so it's good to be able to have him on speed dial. Hey, how many copies of the Nuremberg Chronicle were actually printed? He's like, I don't know. Let me get back to you. You know, it's that kind of a relationship that I have with him. Who's going to ask him that besides other print dealers? You would, right. But not me, you know? So, but yeah, Armin, I think that he also likes the fact that my prints are references to a time long gone. You have to understand that every single print that I have ever made has an art historical, print historical reference there. Every single one where I'm either ripping off an old master design, and I say that not worried about it or feeling bad about it because they all ripped each other off.
Of course.
They all referenced each other. So I'm referencing them. I truly feel that those artists from way back when are like members of my family. So I treat it like that. I feel like part of a lineage to that.
And for those listening on their commute, if someone's never seen your work, how would you describe it? How would you start to lure them in?
They're highly detailed. They're really large. They're graphically complex. They're compositionally complex. There's a lot of violence in them.
Okay, there we go.
There's a lot of sex in them. There's a lot of politics in them, which is all the stuff that make life what it is. You know, in my work, I want to be a mirror to society like Hogarth was. I've said many times before, I get a lot of flack for my work sometimes because of its depiction of sex and depiction of violence. And I tell people, make the world a nicer place and I'll make nicer prints. It's not the role of the satirist or the social commentator to be accepted and embraced all the time because people don't ultimately want to look at that side of themselves. I want to change the world in that way. Now, I'm guilty of this too. I put myself in there in a lot of ways too. So it's not just complete railing on people that I don't agree with or whatever. The work is about me too. I'm in there. What you see on the wall or in the print is me thinking this stuff out for the most part. And if I didn't have this outlet, I'd probably have a hostage somewhere. Okay, so society should be happy that I have this outlet, you know. They're woodcuts, which is, for your listeners, that's where you draw on a block of wood and you carve out the drawing for the most part. That's the oldest form of printmaking that there is, really. That's what I do. And I use cherry plywood. Dürer didn't have plywood. If he would have, he'd been making prints as big as I do or bigger. I use cherry plywood, and I use the fruit hardwoods because they hold a lot of detail, and they hold up over a long course of printing. Artists like Dürer and Kreinek and Balding and all those artists, they use the fruit hardwoods like apple, cherry, and pear. And so I use cherry. I used to use birch a long time ago, but the work progressed into more detail on a larger scale, so I use cherry now. And I use Japanese wood gouges to carve them out. I do a pen and ink drawing on the block, and then I carve the drawing out with Japanese wood gouges, all by hand, no electric, no Dremel tools, none of that stuff. I do it all slow by hand. One block usually takes me 3 to 4 months to do. One project that's heavily involved, a giant triptych, usually takes 4 to 5 years to do. And I'm doing small prints along the way to pay the bills, while I'm doing these gigantic vanity projects,
And that's been the role of prints for 5.5
Yes.
centuries. Is
Yes.
while the artist is working on the big project, they're making prints to pay the bills.
That's exactly right. I used to feel bad about that in a way, like I had like $10 prints. I have $25,000 prints and I have $10 prints and everything in between. And I felt bad about selling the $10 prints of little monsters and animals and crazy stuff like that. And then I had a studio visit with Dick Field, who's the god of contemporary print. I was like, yeah, I feel kind of bad. I'm selling these prints for $10. He's like, why? And I was like, oh, they're little dinky things, not very challenging in terms of subject matter. They're just little monsters. And he's like, Tom. Dürer had his minor prints too. And I was like, oh, okay. If Dick Field says it, then it's got to be okay. So I never looked back.
What do you think was behind that feeling bad?
Because me doing affordables, which is kind of what we can call them, I guess, came from the Outlaw Printmaker group that I'm associated with. When we first started out, we would do these, we call them print slinger events, where we would literally set up folding tables in a rock club in Austin, Texas. And during a show of a blues band or a metal band or a rock band, we would be selling our prints. And, like I'm going to put Electric Baloney Land that's $25,000 out on a folding table. People would come up and they would, I'd have my t-shirts and I have stickers and stuff like that. And people knew my work would be like, oh, I love your stuff, man, and they tend to be kids. Kids don't buy $25,000 prints, but I want them to have my work too, okay? So I started doing prints that are 5 inches by 10 inches or 5 by 8, 5 by 7, somewhere in there. Smaller prints that I can do faster that are $10 or $15. And to me, that is worth, it pays for my trip out there, basically. But they end up with a real print and that they're going to respond to and keep forever, or that's worth everything to me. So you make the work to get it out to people. That's what one of the joys of being a printmaker. You can reach a wider audience. And it's not the same as throwing it up on your phone. Okay, having the real thing live and in reality is a big part of this. So doing the affordables is a constant thing of mine. I'm going to be working on one today. I'm combining a porcupine and a pug. It's called a porcupug. Okay. And so that's what I'm going to be doing today. As soon as we get done, I'm going to run up to the studio and start drawing a porcupug print.
The smaller prints usually are a single figure or character.
Yes,
you call them
yeah.
characters.
Yeah.
Like, are they dress rehearsals for that character showing up in a larger woodcut later?
They're starting to go that way. They're starting to go. I have the next 10 years planned. I've always been that way. I'm working on something right now that I started planning 6 years ago. So I can tell where this is going. And in the project after the current project that I'm going to be starting, there's going to be some animal creatures that show up in there. And the apocalyptic pets, I call them, or the war wigglers and the bugs, those are all my affordable prints. Well, those things came from loving those old woodcuts of the end of the world, the fanciful monsters and curious beasts. What would happen if, they believe the world is flat? Well, what kind of creatures live when you fall off the edge of the world? Well, they believe the earth is flat again these days. So,
still relevant.
Yeah, the stuff really sort of never went away, I guess. But that's where that comes from, a healthy love for those old woodcuts of creatures that, that's why my number one favorite print of all time is the Rhinoceros by Dürer. And, it wasn't always my number one until the last, maybe 5 or 6 years. It was always up there and I loved it. It's the story about it and how Dürer did it from notes, did it from imagination, and got it ballpark right to where that's kind of what people picture in their head a rhinoceros to look like, still to this day. And it was a very popular print in its day. That's my favorite print of all time. And it varies. I'm a list guy with my old master favorites, but that's my number one. And it's part of that curious monsters and fanciful beasts thing from the Middle Ages. So my affordables, ultimately, to make this a circle, comes out of that.
I have to go back to the rhinoceros because, I know and love the print as well. But, why do you think Dürer made it? Was he just trying to prove that he could extrapolate information from sources and produce a fantastical beast that no one will ever see unless they walk to Africa?
Well, with Dürer, I'm sure that let's prove that I can do this. I'll bet you that's number one. Number two, he wanted to make some cash. He knew his market. And number three, he probably was fascinated by it, by reading about it. So, and you know what? That's no different than any print that I make now. I do it for all three of those reasons. Let's see if I can do this. I'm fascinated by the subject matter, and let's make some cash. So it hasn't really changed that much with my work or, over 500 years or whatever. I've been very lucky over my life. From the time I was 13, that's when this all really started for me. And I've been very fortunate to get to meet a lot of my heroes, all except Dürer. I didn't get to meet him. A lot of my print and art heroes I've gotten to meet. And I also got to see a lot of cool work in real life from the time I was really young. And that's sort of where this started.
Your parents took you to a Dürer show in Germany, right?
No, my grandparents.
Your grandparents.
It was this strange thing. This is 1984. And they knew a bishop. We're Catholic. And it was common it still is, for retired people to take trips to what they call the Holy Land. Well, since I was 3 years old, there were no illusions in my family. I was going to be an artist. Okay, that's what I'm going to be from the time I was 3. I didn't know what kind of artist, of course, but so my grandparents knew, Tommy has an interest in art. We're getting ready to go to the Holy Land. As part of the Holy Land trip, Italy, Rome and Florence are on that list because you just jump around. They took me over and we went. So 1984, I went to the Sistine Chapel. That's far out, man. A kid from Potosi, Missouri in 1984, at 12 years old, getting to go to the Sistine Chapel. Okay. Well, on the way into the chapel, there's another gallery. I don't know if it's still like this or not. I think it is, but there's a gallery leadway into there. And Dürer's Apocalypse was up. Now, the thing that's fascinating about that now is that, the Vatican didn't buy those things in the 80s. They probably bought them from him. Okay? So the Apocalypse was up, and I remember that's a big day. Looking at the Apocalypse and then going into the Sistine Chapel before the Sistine Chapel was cleaned.
Right.
I saw it before it was cleaned. It stuck with me. I didn't know what they were. I just remembered the artist name, Dürer. There was nothing there, a book or anything I could buy, but it stuck in my head. And then I came home. And then 3 weeks later, my parents went on our family vacation. I'm like, this is travel crazy for me at 12 years old. And our family vacation was through state parks on the way out to Washington, D.C., where Dad wanted to see the Washington Monument and all that stuff. We're going to go to the National Gallery of Art. And so this is 3 weeks after I got back from Rome. We go to the National Gallery of Art, and they had Dürer's Apocalypse up. So I saw it twice in 5 weeks, once in Europe and once here. And I went into the gift shop. My mom gave me $20 to buy a book, and I bought the woodcuts of Albrecht Dürer by Kurth, those Dover editions. And I figured, I didn't know what a woodcut was. I just thought they were really cool drawings. I mean, I'm 12. Your idea of art isn't a painting or a sculpture. You're not really exposed to printmaking really until college. Most people don't have access to presses and things like that.
But you didn't make a lino cut in 4th grade or something?
No, I didn't do any print
we did.
at all. I know. I went to a really rural school. So I came home and had the book that I bought at the National Gallery, and I looked at it so much. I just thought they were really cool pen and ink drawings. Now you have to understand that my impression of, no pun intended, my impression of Dürer at that point fit within my ideas of what good art was. Because at the time, because I'm 13 basically, and I'm a gigantic Iron Maiden fan, and Judas Priest, and all the metal, Motörhead. Any one of those Dürer prints could be an album cover for Iron Maiden. So, there's everything that a 13-year-old boy could love in a Dürer print. Horrors of Babylon, monsters, dragons, knights, demons, evil, dark, lurid subject matter. It makes total sense. So, in a weird way, to this day, I figured out a way to stay 13 to 15 years old. And I can back it up with art history. But there's also in there, in my aesthetic, I come from being, yes, I'm very fortunate that I got to see that work at a very young age in real life. But art to me at the time was also, you go to Walmart when it's weird, they have albums again now, vinyl records, that's back. But, an Ozzy Osbourne album cover by Boris Vallejo, that was on equal footing to me as a Dürer print or a Da Vinci painting, okay? So art school tries to drill that stuff out of you, what's high art and what's low art. Well, I got news for those folks. The jig is up. It all matters now. Illustration is art, and it all matters in my realm of influence. Okay, I'm influenced by music too, the attitudes and the subject matter of a lot of my favorite music, but it was all packaged in dark and lurid imagery that fit exactly with Dürer prints, and that's sort of where I come from. Now, I wanted to be Chuck Close when I was in high school. Prints being funny or satirical, none of that occurred to me until much later when I was in the last year of graduate school. I wanted to be a photorealist. I always loved Dürer and I loved that stuff, and I loved heavy metal album covers and things like that, but I loved, because you're a kid, technically you're impressed. You don't know that at the time there's more reasons conceptually to be a photorealist and what it stood for in the context of the time. You don't know that until you get into art school and this stuff is beaten in and out of you, by professors and aesthetics and concepts and things like that. But technically Chuck Close is badass, right? And so once a year my parents would take me to the St. Louis Art Museum. It's an hour away from where I grew up, and they have a big painting by Chuck Close called Keith. It's one of the famous ones that's there, and it's massive, right? But at the same time, my mom and dad would make an appointment at the print room at the St. Louis Art Museum because I wanted to see the Dürers again. I was in the print and drawing room at the St. Louis Art Museum. It's much nicer, much bigger now, but I was 13, 14 going to the print room there once a year. I got to go.
Wait. Ho.
Yeah,
How did your parents know that was a thing?
because I asked them.
And they found out.
Well, I thought at the time when you think about it, you think, well, Dürers must be up all the time. But they're not, right? Because their work's on paper. But when you're 13, you don't know. If you've seen Dürer twice in 6 weeks, you think that he's up in every museum all the time. And then my mom and dad think that too. And then they call, oh no, you have to make an appointment. We have those works, Oh, well, then we'll make an appointment. I've been going to the St. Louis Art Museum's print and drawing room since I was 13. And it still never occurred to me that I should make prints. Not until my junior year of college.
And it's so interesting that you've always had
these
things in your life. I'm curious, that kind of photorealistic thing. Was there a time that you felt like the Dürer to Motörhead spectrum? Did you feel like some other force was telling you that wasn't art or wasn't real, or and how is that, since you've had the art historical chops and big name artists associated with that the whole time?
When I got to graduate school, so I did my undergraduate at Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, and I had a teacher there named Herb Fink, who's an old Art Students League guy, right? Did etchings. I was a drawing major. Herb did etchings. When I had him as a teacher, he was almost 80 years old. So I'm drawing from the figure 5-6 hours a day when you're a junior or whatever. They made me take a printmaking class to graduate. I needed to fulfill an elective requirement. It was either that or ceramics. And I had a crush on a girl who was going to take the printmaking class. I thought, well, I'll take the print class, right? So she drops it, of course, the Huck luck, right? She dropped the class, and then I'm in the class. So I did a print. I did a woodcut. And
how'd that feel?
That's a very good question. First of all, I was like, oh, holy shit. That's what these are? How in the hell did Dürer do that? And then the second was, when I printed it, it was like a spiritual knock me on my ass happening. It was like, this is what I was born to do. It was so powerful. Immediately, I ran to the library and I threw myself into print history. Within a week, I was like, okay, and I mean this with all sincerity and honesty, is whenever that happened to me, when I did that first print and I started obsessing over the history of prints, I already had Dürer in my back pocket, but researching it in that week was like jumping into a swimming pool of cleansing in a way. It was like finding members of my family, because there was some sort of connection that I felt like I know Daumier. I felt like I know Goya. I felt like I knew Posada. I felt like Hogarth, and on. And there was this thing where I want to make prints. That's what I'm put here to do. So I wasn't a print major in undergraduate. I got my BFA in drawing. But for graduate school, I went for printmaking. And I was very behind, because you have to understand that I was 22 or so. I did my entire undergrad in 3 years. I did it all in 3 years, because there's a whole backstory to that. But I skipped a year basically. And so I was very young in graduate school. I went right in and I was overmatched maturity wise. I went to Washington University in St. Louis and I was very not ready. And I basically, I do prints, but how am I going to do photorealism prints still, and on and on. And so I shut down basically. I had the worst crit in the history of crits. I mean, everybody was there. Like, there was a visiting artist there, the dean was there, people from print council were there. It was the worst. It was one of those weird, and I show up with a bunch of white walls. And it wasn't conceptual, okay? I couldn't back it up. And I got put on probation, and it was a 2-year program, so I had to get my shit together. And I had always piddled around in my sketchbook, and one of the studio visits that I had was from a guy named Doug Dowd, who's this amazing teacher at WashU. And Joan Hall also is the best teacher I ever had. She was the one that was so hard on me. But Doug came and did a studio visit and was looking over my sketchbook. He knew I was on probation, and he knew I was having a hard time. I had grabbed this book from Joan's office on Warrington Colescott. I love Warrington's work. But it had not clicked in my head yet, because I had this thing in my mind of what a serious artist was. And Doug was looking through my sketchbooks. He saw the Warrington Colescott book, and he was like, Tom, it's okay to be funny. And it was a big moment. Somebody that I respected, sort of that one line, it's okay to be funny. And then I realized, Düer's funny. Hogarth is hilarious. Warrington Colescott is a riot. So I decided to stop making prints for the remainder of my time at WashU, Washington University. And I just did big, huge charcoal drawings about crazy shit that I had seen in my hometown of Potosi, because there's a lot of crazy stuff that goes on everywhere. But I needed to make work about me, and that's where I'm from. And so I did a big drawing about my brothers going deer hunting and dances at the local VFW hall. And I did these giant drawings about that. And that is a la Warrington Colescott, rural satire. Because I think when people talk to me in school, they realize I like to tell jokes and I'm a funny guy. I make fun of things. That's what I do. That was the leap that I made. So I put these big drawings up in graduate school, and everybody was just, I did one drawing, it was like 13 foot by 7 feet, right? For my thesis show. And people were, they were just, their jaws were on the ground because they'd never seen something like that. And they were very contemporary. They were almost so big, they were almost an installation when they were put up. So I could back it up. All my influences, they weren't prints, but all my influences, Daumier, it all came in to perfect line for me. And then I got out of graduate school and I decided to do a whole big body of work about my hometown called 2 Weeks in August, 14 Rural Absurdities. I worked on that for 3 years, and that's how I got my start, basically, in as a pro.
Pro.
I talked a
like
lot
a golf,
there.
like a golf pro. I love that.
like a golf pro. All right.
Right. But I love that it took somebody to give you permission to synthesize all of the elements that were just sitting there floating around in your head, and then suddenly, wham, they all come together.
It's funny. It's the Big Bang for me. 1994 was my Big Bang, and I'm still shooting out into the print cosmos. The momentum that was created for me then is still going now. Thankfully, with the way that I work, I'm not a knee-jerk reaction artist. I got a speeding ticket, so I'm going to make a print about the cops. I don't work like that. It gets filed and it factors in later, and things are thought about and drawn about and worked over and thought about, drawn about and worked over again and again and again before they come out. So like I told you earlier, I'm working on something right now that I started 6 years ago. That's the way that this works for me. I don't rush into anything. One of the cool things about doing woodcuts is that they take so long, it gives your ideas time to mature. I tend to do 1 or 2 things at a time. I'm not working on 5 projects at once. I tend to be working on 2 now at a time.
While you're carving for months on end, where's your brain while your hand's doing that?
Well, I got music going usually. I try to not listen too much to the news, although that's hard because I'm a news junkie. Mostly music. I'm thinking. I mean, every single mark that I make, every line that I carve, I have to think about it. It's a decision. There are billions of lines. Everyone's a decision, and it takes a long time, and it's very, very tedious. Usually it's right there on that line, and then I wisp away in between for a second, and then I come back to the line, and then I go away, and then I come back to the line, and it's like, oh, what am I going to have for lunch? I'm back to the line. Oh, Trump sucks. Okay, I'm back to the line. God, Afghanistan's a mess right now. Back to the line. And that's how my mind kind of works. Then I take a break, and then I come back, and it's the same thing. I do about 6 to 7 a day hours of carving. I'll take a drawing day once a week, typically, where I'm just going to draw on my sketchbook today to give my hands a break, but also my brain a break in a way, because a lot of times my ideas come from drawing in the sketchbook. They always start there with a grain of an idea, and then new things will come to me as I'm drawing in my sketchbook. Really good sketchbook habit. So that's a very important, almost the most important part of what I do is recording ideas and thoughts and notation. If you look at one of my sketchbook, it's all over the place. It's almost equal parts journal as it is drawings. It's funny, if I write something down, I don't usually have to go back to it. It's a weird thing. If I don't write it down, it's a terrible thing. If I don't write something down, I'll try and reconstruct it 2 to 3 days later in my head, and it's really it's quite traumatic, actually, trying to go back and reverse build those blocks, because my mind's always going all the time, filtering information and structuring information to get to a conceptual continuity that will work in a picture. I'm always operating like that. Journals and sketchbooks are essential to the way that I work. I'm not like a gunslinger type artist that goes in there and let's just figure something out today. That gunslinger mentality comes about in my sketchbooks. That's where I find things and find new ways of expression and depiction and that sort of thing.
Do you go back to the first sketchbook, or I mean, do they act as sort of browsing catalogs over time?
It's a weird thing. Very rarely do I go back. Except when the new project is ready to be started, I'll go back then to that and review. And then I have a folder where, like, so we could talk about my titles and stuff here in a minute, I guess, but like, because I'm going to throw one out there. So I'm working on this project right now that I'm trying to finish. It's been a 4 or 5 year project. And then of course I've got the next project planned, which is going to be a 5-year project. And it's all like failed. Oddly enough, the timing is right, but US failed military exercises.
Oh.
It's going to be called Battle Scar Craptastica. Okay. And for those of you that don't remember the 70s, there was a show called Battlestar Galactica. Okay. Well, this is Battlestar Craptastica. And it's a war room that I'm making, basically, with giant woodcuts and stuff. Well, I have a folder with that title, a big long manila folder, and over the last 3 or 4 years, when I see a magazine article or with a picture, I'll take it and I'll throw it in that folder. Or if I have a reference manual of military uniforms that I found, I'll put it in there. And mixed up with photocopies of my sketchbook drawings and notes, I put it in that folder. And when it comes time to do that next big body of work, I got a table, clear the table off, throw the folder out, I start working out what I'm going to do. That's how I go about it. It's like a movie director, because they're big projects and I'm always working stuff out. So like, the way that I'm thinking in terms of this next big project is sort of referencing the triumphant arch of Maximilian. The triumphant arch has factored into my work a lot in the last 3 or 4 projects, because I like the idea of monuments on paper, things that travel, prints that are actual functioning objects as well. I really love that. And I'm really into the procession that went along with the arch. So I'm working on that part of the Battle Scar triptych. There's going to be a whole section of like Now I'm going to throw something in there about the Capitol riot on January 6th. The three basic failures that I'm going to be working on, military failures, is one is Bay of Pigs. When I was a kid, you read Bay of Pigs. What the hell is that? You think, is there a bunch of pigs in a bay someplace? You know, that's how I was when I was a kid. They have these names. And the second one, the center panel is Custer's Last Stand. And then the third panel is Black Hawk Down, Somalia. Those are the three that I'm going to start with, but already they're expanding out into this other thing. So that's how it works over 4 or 5 years. My ideas, they may be in different parts of my brain. I may have a title in the center of my brain, and I got ideas over in the left and the right part of my brain. And over 5 years of thinking and drawing and planning, they more often than not, they all gel into one concept. That's sort of how these go with me. That's where it goes. But it takes that 5 years of working it out. My images are me thinking out these things and what issues are in my head about society's ills and what's going on at the time. And I have views on this stuff. I don't ever really go into my prints thinking, okay, I'm going to go after and nail this group to the wall. But it just so happens that there's a lot of bad behavior in this world. One of my rules is if you don't want to be in my shit, don't do bad shit. But that's not going to happen, is it? You know, I cursed. Yes, I'm sorry. You have to.
Okay.
It'd really be cool if you beep that out. You know, like beep. That's cool, or because they wonder what did he say. I've been talking a lot, so you guys go ahead.
Your mind exhausts me. I can't even imagine what flies around in your head 24/7.
We're not even at 9 a.m. here yet.
Exactly.
Well, thinking about some of your heroes, if Domier's mind was like yours, you're like, well, no wonder you made 4,000 prints.
I work every day. I don't think about it like that anymore. I never really did. I just work every day. And if you work every day, you're going to make a lot of stuff. And like I said, it's that big bang for me in 1994. Everybody has different big bangs in their life. I've been watching at night these documentaries on cults. Well, they've had a big bang. If you wake up one day and you decide you're going to join Heaven's Gate, there's a 20-year momentum there that ended up in where it was. Okay, so it's the same for me. It was that kind of a spiritual awakening for me, but it was Prince, and it was what I was put here to do as an artist. I mean, I'll take it. I take Sundays off. I feel terrible when I don't work. I don't feel good when I'm not, like if I'm on the road doing a visiting artist gig or something, or I'm doing a lecture for a show or whatever. If I haven't been in the studio for 3 or 4 days, I feel lost. Feel like I'm wandering around. The only place where I am in complete control of my life is in front of those blocks. I'm the judge, jury, and executioner there. That's where I feel safe. I have a good time too. You know, I do. I like going to a bar every once in a while. I like to, but typically I don't do that unless I've had a really good day at work.
Well, and like you were just saying earlier, how you described it sort of as your mind wandering, but really what I was hearing is that within every one of those lines, you're sewing in all of your thoughts and all of your life. And so that carving process, all of those lines are holding all that.
Yes. I've never heard it put that way, but yes, that's true. There is intention in every single mark that's loaded with background and concept. Yes, it's all there. To me, this is a lifetime thing. I saw a list of some of the questions this morning. One of them in there was like, what does success mean? To me, success is to be able to have a life where you're doing this every day. And if you manage to make some money off of it, which I have to because this is how I make my living, there's a practical side to it that you can't ignore, and a business side. But the way I always look at it is, you know, I'm not thinking, oh man, if I can sell that triptych, I can get a new car. No, I'm thinking if I sell that triptych, I get to do my next project. That's the way that I look at things. I don't have a really nice car. The life is built around the art, not the opposite way. And when you do that, the art is at the center of my life, and I built the life around it. Okay, when you take that approach, that means you're going to end up with 4,000 prints like Damier. And there's some people that can't do that, and I understand. It's really a very difficult life. There's a lot of responsibility that goes along with it. There's a lot of trouble because society isn't set up for people to make art as a living. It's very difficult, especially in prints because they're cheaper. So it's not like the latest painting by Kehinde, which I love. You know, those things go for, what are they now? $150,000, $250,000. Okay, well, that somebody's going to get a cut of that. Well, with prints up now, I'm getting they're worth more than that. I talked to Ann, you once on the phone. I was like, how much do you think I should sell this for? And you're like, up. You need to go up with this. Get the price up there. So my prices have gone up for sure, but they're still way down compared to someone that does a painting. And that makes total sense. Prints are always cheaper. So I don't do paintings. I make prints. And so there's a structure there that I have to work within to make this life go.
Do you collect prints? Do you have an
No,
impression of the rhinoceros?
I wish. I've thought about stealing.
I'm going on a hunting mission later.
There's no way I could buy a. I don't have. You know what would happen if honey? I just bought the Dürer Rhino. Right? You know, I got them in books, so that's okay. And I get to see them in real life. It's kind of like if you could have Led Zeppelin come over to your house and play every day, would you really appreciate it as much as having to go make an appointment at a print room?
Oh, I don't know. I love living with Prince.
The artist, formerly known as Prince?
May he rest in peace.
Yes,
no,
yes.
I have some prints. I mean, there's one in my office right here that was by a student that was he in your class, Ben, or he was a couple years ahead of you?
A year or two above.
Yeah, I'm like a student.
I have prints by my friends, and I get asked all the time, who are your favorite artists? I'm very lucky. Contemporary artists, they're my friends, a lot of them. Suko, and who's one of my heroes. I was very lucky when I was a kid that some really important print people supported my work and were champions of my work. I got really lucky. But my friends are really, a lot of them are really well-known printmakers, so I got some really cool prints. So I do, yes. To answer your question, Ian, I don't have any of my heroes' prints. I have one Damier, but I don't have any Dürers, unfortunately. I wish I had some. But all my prints are pretty much by people that are alive, with the exception of like a Richard Mock or a Warrington Colescott, which I have. But I traded with them.
That's exactly what you're supposed to do. I'm pulling up a old Christie's auction record from 2013, and a Dürer Rhinoceros did in fact sell for $866,000. The estimate was
I was right.
But the estimate was 100 to 150, so something went wacky.
They blew that. Something went whack-a-mole.
I wouldn't think it. I would not have said you would have to pay $800,000 for that.
Two people really wanted it.
Exactly.
Is it a blue one or a black and white one?
It's black and white.
Yeah, that's cool. Those blue ones, man. I love the one. It was added later though.
Right.
After he died.
Ben and I used to always talk about, if you could time travel, where would you go back? Ben would always pop back to that pharmacist shop in, where the hell was it, Madrid or something, and buy all the Goyas.
Oh man. Yeah. Yes. There'd be one of those. I'd go back if I could time travel to any point. You know what? It would be one of two. That's a really cool question. I love thinking about this stuff. I would probably go back to the Dürer Maximilian era for a few hours, see what was going on in the shop, to see how they dealt with all that stuff. Or I would go Not too long ago, I would go back to Frida and Diego
Mm.
and hang out with that bunch because, man, Frida had an affair with Josephine Baker. How cool is that,
It's
man?
fluid. Yeah, right?
And Diego was a bad guy, a lot of drama. I like to just be a friend in the circle, for about 24 hours and see what that was like, and then get out, come back to my studio in the backyard. Those are the two time periods: mid to late Dürer, mid to late Diego Frida. Posada would be cool too.
The first thing that popped into my brain was to zip back to the Stieglitz circle in the early part of the 20th century
That was
and
a good bunch too.
hang out with my buddy Charles Demuth.
Mm. What would your day be like?
I don't That's a good question. I
What
don't
would
know,
your
go to
day
the
be like?
Algonquin for breakfast and,
See,
I
we
don't
have
know.
these rosy images too of like looking back on what it must have been like, but they were tired and bored just like we were.
Well, and Demuth was ill. Like he was a very
Yeah.
serious diabetic and was one of the first people in the first wave of self-injected insulin.
Mm.
But didn't save him. He died pretty early.
Lautrec and all that era too, that would have been amazing. I mean, I'd have died. I would like go back for a day and die in that day. Like, and not be able to come back. I'd like do something terrible. Just what's the word? Overindulgence in everything. I love Lautrec. I'm a big, big Lautrec fan. That stuff moves me. I want to be moved with the art that I look at, and I want to make art that I want to look at. That's how I go about it. Man, those Lautrec, everything, the paintings, the posters, all of it.
He was he was definitely something.
He was something else.
Yeah, he was. I always feel like looking at I actually feel that you have for me, a similar thing as Peter Milton, that there are so many quotations, art history quotations, societal history quotations, that I feel like I have to decode the entire thing and draw a map of it and make notes about what the things are. I mean, they're so dense
It
and
looks like my sketchbook.
right.
It's funny. Peter Milton's awesome. There's a lot of coded message in there. My work used to be very literal. Like, okay, here's a woman at a grease pig contest in rural Missouri. That was enough narratively. Okay, in a prom dress. Okay, that was enough. Over the years, I've gotten more allegorical just because that's maturing probably, and things get more complicated in life, and things have certainly gotten more complicated in society with society's ills. I kind of have gotten a little more surreal. There's more freedom there. I'm always considering the audience along the way, and I look at it like Bosch. Okay, I'm sure that there was probably some sort of libretto where the viewers could go along and know what this here there meant, whatever. But my main thing with the viewer is to bring them in with beautiful mark making, take them for a ride visually that they may not know where they're going, and then maybe bring them back later with more readings of it once they've gone on the ride and enjoyed it. But I also want to scare people. But I want it to be like they've been scared and now they're looking back around the corner at it. I want to go back in there, that haunted house. That's kind of where I am as a visual depictor. I want to entertain people. At the same time, there are things in there that if they don't get it, that's okay. I put enough stuff in there that people are going to draw their own narrative conclusions as well. There's stuff going on. There's crazy stuff going on. Sometimes I put things in there just for visual effect. Sometimes it can be a compositional thing that I put in there, like, oh, I'm going to put a black S&M mask on this character down in the right. It'll look cool. It's kind of dark and lurid, but it also anchors that bottom right corner really well. So that's a happy bonus. that it works compositionally. I would bet that that happens in most artists' work. That not everything you put in has a meaning to it. Sometimes, but not all the time. And if there's something read into it, that's great.
I'm curious, this whole conversation, I've definitely been critical of my own probably assumptions. And I'm curious if that plays in. You've outlined this trajectory, this, you're continuing this centuries old tradition. Like, all these things have full backing, precise evidence behind. There's still, I don't know, I don't have a synthesized question yet, but I mean, I feel like maybe for someone coming from my own lived experience, your aesthetic definitely is loud and in your face, and I haven't questioned anything you've said because it's all there, and it's obvious that that all of your
I should start a cult.
but I guess the overarching question is, are you seeking to question some of those assumptions? And you mentioned like the kind of high low, I mean the kind of brazen aspects, but then of course these things are humongous, and they're incredibly intricate, and that you've considered in every way.
When I got out of graduate school, it was 1995. Okay, obviously pre-internet and all that, pre-cell phones. At that time of the print world are the big shops. So ULA, Graphic Studio, Tamarind, Tandem, Landfall, and on. Crown Point, Sharks, all of those places. And the way that you saw those things were usually in art news magazines or cards that were sent to print shops at universities. That's how you knew of these things. If you're an independent, now, Ben, I hope I'm going to get to answer your question right, but I'm going to take the long way around. Surprise, surprise. When I got out of school, completely unknown, you want to make prints for a living. What do you do? Because the perception in the art world of printmaking really, and it still kind of can be this way, is the big shops. What are the big shops doing? Independent self-publishers weren't really getting a lot of attention at that time, if they ever had, to be honest with you. I mean, maybe here or there was one or two. So what do you do? How do you compete with that? Well, my friend Bill Fick, one of my art heroes, is a fantastic printmaker, one of my best friends. I knew of Bill's work through posters that he would send out to print shops at schools, and it would be some zombie monster head with a slogan that said "Sausage Eater Gone Mad," published by Cockeyed Press, New York, New York. And I'm a kid thinking, well, okay, Cockeyed Press, it must be this amazing place. Yeah, he's got elves and everything. And then finally, I went to New York to meet Bill and on a fan trip, and I get to Cockeyed Press, and it's a closet where he's sleeping underneath his press. And then it dawned on me, oh, okay, that's how you compete with the big shops. As an independent, you just call yourself a press, and you've got an address. There's no internet. We didn't know. You send cards out, and you start promoting your work as an independent through the mail. That's the way we did it. And I guess to get to your question is, it certainly helped to have that chip on your shoulder going up against what was perceived as good and legitimate in the print world. That's a punk thing. Who are you going to fight? And at the time, 1995, most printmaking that you could get to was in universities. And it's still that way because universities are the only places that can afford those big presses. That's why kids don't have exposure to printmaking really until they get to college. And that's cool, but the downside to that is that in academia, printmaking tends to be done only in the university print shop, and it stays pretty safe. So the work that was going on in 1995 that I was exposed to in print land that was contemporary was pretty safe academic work functioning within a university system. Well, me and Bill Fick and Sean Star Wars and all these guys, we only got to know each other through the mail, basically, and the Outlaw Printmaker group. And we're like, okay, we want to take printmaking back to 400 years ago, or at least the German Expressionists, where you're using the print medium to make work about social commentary and society's ills and make it political. Sukkot was out there. Richard Mach was out there. But like I said, there's only one or two. So Richard Mach did linoleum cuts on the pages of the New York Times on the op-ed page for 13 years. I saw his work when I was a kid. My mom and dad got the New York Times delivered a week late, in Potosi, Missouri. I didn't know, I had that. And Richard became a friend and a hero. So we had that built in. Okay, we're taking on something here. We're bringing something back a little bit. Everything is good. Everything is worthy of having an audience. It wasn't that we hated academic prints. It wasn't that we hated non-objective work done in print, or it's not that we hated decorative stuff, and it isn't even that we hated Leroy Neiman posters. That stuff, it's all good, but there was not a lot of social commentary and criticism in print at that time. So yeah, the answer to your question is yes, we are playing with and taking on some stuff, if that makes any sense. That's where that all comes from. Okay, all right. There.
Yeah, you created your own community, which is so beautiful, and what print does so well, whether you're in the shop together, that communal thing, or the fact that you're working in multiples so that you and I and Ann can all have an impression of the same print, and we're in that community together. And it's so interesting because, I don't know enough about your community.
I'm lucky. I've said this earlier. I'm very lucky, and a bunch of the other guys and gals are too. Catherine Polk is another one of ours. She's just amazing artist. Erica Walker, part of the Outlaw Printmaker group. But I personally was very fortunate in that when I was 23, 24 years old, very young, someone saw my work someplace, a guy named Jack Lemon, Landfall Press. He had me come up to Landfall in Chicago and do a print there. That's the big leagues. So here I am, an independent, taking those people on and then going to do prints there. And then there are artists like Warrington Colescott. He saw my work someplace and really took me under his wing and coached me along. And so you got the print publisher that recognized my work early on. You got the artist Warrington Colescott, saw and encouraged me early on. And then you had the print curator, Jerry Cohn, at Harvard, The Fog. First sale I ever made. I sold 15 prints to The Fog at 25 years old. And she was like, you need to keep doing this. This is great. Just keep it up. Keep it up. And so I'm lucky that I had that level of person that I respected, giving me a kick in the pants at that young of an age. It's part of the momentum that is still going now, but you only maintain that momentum if you keep working every day. You got to go at it every day. But that community that I'm a part of is part of it too. The print world is a small world. It's very, very small. And that is a good thing, really, because it makes it more punk rock. Because if you have a bunch of people that are all together and they feel like the general populace doesn't give a damn about what they're doing, that means usually there are less rules about what you can do. And that's where an artist like Swoon comes out of. An artist like Sean Star Wars comes out of. An artist like Carlos Hernandez, who does lithographs, etchings, woodcuts, but his screen prints are done for big bands, big time bands. And we all do illustration work as well that dips outside of the print world. But that smallish community can be a really good thing. A lot of growing and thriving can happen under the encouragement from people that you get to call up on the phone.
Yeah, it's very clear that you are also filling that role with those, $10 printed shows. I mean, and when you were saying that, I was like, well, yeah, people who buy $25,000 prints when they're in their 30s and 40s and whatever, like those were kids once too. And and if you're giving that more people that exposure younger and meeting them where they are, and they can grow with your work. I mean, that's a beautiful thing.
Now, look, in a way, we've painted a pretty rosy picture here, too. There is a dark side to my work, which I get and I don't mind taking that stuff on. Yeah, I got a lot of fans of my stuff, and that's great. But I also have a lot of people that think what I do is very immature. It's not high art. They think my work is sexist. They think it's violent. They think it's whatever, you name it. I'm probably not going to be able to sell them $10 prints. I'm probably not going to be able to sell them $25,000 prints. But, you can't win them all. Especially the sex element in the work I've gotten a lot of flack for. It's not necessarily for the depiction of women, because I depict men equally as bad. And animals, and everybody's bad. I guess everybody is a target in a way in a bad, failed society. But I get a lot of flack from that, and I think about that from time to time, and I worry about that here and there, because you do want to please your audience ultimately, but I don't know how I got off on that, but it just popped into my head, like when it comes to depiction, how you keep the world at arm's length as an artist. You can sometimes in the populace get painted as something that you're really not, because sometimes that's the downside of not being literal a lot of times in your work. I don't know why. It was like a tangent I got off on there. So,
Well, they're certainly not easy.
No.
You got to want to dive in there into the deep end there.
Life ain't easy.
Right.
I mean, one of my print, if I could talk for just a little bit about, we're going on a long time here, but one of my prints, it's called the Tommy Peepers, and it's a triptych, and it's all about sex. And as a teenage boy at the swimming pool, seeing this beautiful lifeguard named Stephanie, I was, so that was on June 15th, 1983 at 2:30 in the afternoon. She was gorgeous. I was underwater with my snorkel and goggles on, and she dove off the diving board, and her top came down for just a half second, and she pulled it back up, and I'm like, oh my God, gulp. And 30 years later, I spent 4 years making a fucking print about her. Okay, so now you tell me who's working it out. I'm working it out. I've got issues over this. It's about me. It's being honest. And if I'm fixated on that, I'm working it out. I don't know how many of those prints I sold. I think I sold a few, but it's not my most popular. I didn't make it to sell. I made that one set 4 years for me. I worked it out through the work. It's about me and my issues in it.
But the good thing about it is, and what we talk about in the curatorial realms a lot, or at least we did when I was at the museum, is this idea of artists who depict things that are pointedly at a specific event that generations later won't know what in the world happened at the end of Afghanistan, or whatever the situation is, that if it's more universal. And of course, a young boy's seeing a beautiful woman's boobs for the first time is completely universal.
That's
right?
A universal thing.
Sure.
Yes, yeah. It is. That's timeless.
Right.
and one of the things about the work, too, that I have found is there are weird things that happen along the way that say, yeah, you need to do this. You need to do this project. And that was certainly one of those, the Tommy Peepers set of prints. I was planning that set of prints out and went through about 2 years of, I'm going to do this. I even had it so the Temptation of St. Anthony, if you look at the center panel of the Tommy Peepers, that is Martin Schongauer's Temptation of St. Anthony, except St. Anthony is Stephanie, the lifeguard, surrounded by a bunch of boys swimming in a pool. Okay, that's what that is. So I had that all planned out, and I'm thinking, God, do I really need to go down a 3-year to 4-year wormhole every day about Stephanie Harrelson's breasts? Do I? And I was like, ultimately, yes, I'm going to do it. And so I'm planning this out, thinking about it, drawing it, had been for about 6 months. And one night I got a message on Facebook. It was the early days of Facebook Messenger, I guess. And it was from a Stevie B. And I was like, I don't know who that is. I'm not. And I went around and I did some other stuff online. And I was like, okay, I'll open it up. And I opened it up and it was like, Dear Tommy, you may not remember me, but My name is Stephanie Harrelson. My sister saw your sister at the grocery store because everybody's still in the same hometown. And I just think what you're doing with your art is so great. And I was like, oh my God. And I was like, oh my God, should I tell her? No. And so I thought, I'm going to tell her. And I go, Stephanie, I remember it was June 15th, 1983 at 2:30 in the afternoon, and you were the lifeguard, and you dove off and I went through the whole thing, and I hit send, and I was like, oh my God, what have I done? Because usually I'm taking pot shots at people from the trees or something. I don't talk to my subjects. I don't warn my subject. And I'm waiting and dreading. What did I do? And she sent it back immediately. She was like, oh my God, that's amazing. My boobs are going to be in a museum someday. And I was like, yes, I'm going to do the project. And that's out of nowhere. Right. And I sent her one of the triptychs.
Aww.
Yeah. And I hadn't seen her since that summer in 1983. So there's also a weird destiny thing with these that pop up. Crazy things happen. But that's probably normal. In the 4-year project, there's always going to be crazy stuff happen. There's a big window of stuff to happen. No?
Right. All right. So we've talked for an hour and a half.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
And you thought you wouldn't have something to say.
Oh, well,
Thanks for listening to this episode with Tom Hück, featuring me and Ben Levy. Thanks to him and to Tom for being such good sports about it. Also, as usual, I need to thank Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. Thank you, Michael. I'm going to put on the show notes page some of the artists' works that Tom referred to, like the Dürer Rhinoceros and the Triumphal Arch, Schongauer St. Anthony, things like that. So you'll be able to refer to some of the images that he's thinking about when he does his work. You could find those over at platemarkpodcast.com. I hope you're enjoying these interviews with the colorful characters, as I've come to call them, of the print ecosystem. It's a wonderful, small world, and I like to say to anyone who will listen, print people are the nicest people. So thank you, and we will see you next time.